Hi, everyone, and welcome to another episode of Ancient Warfare Answers with Murray. We're going to have a look at a couple of questions. Well, one question this week and then another one for next week. And, of course, you can ask a question. These two have come through via email. So, obviously, when I asked and put my email out there, people have answered. So, I've got a question from Bill, which is right up my alley, which is essentially, how long was the Macedonian Sarissa? I've read a lot about 20 feet, but sometimes longer. So that's the question I'm going to answer in a moment. But prior to that, of course, you can ask us a question. You can also support us on Patreon. You just have to go to patreon.com/Ancient Warfare Podcast, and you can back us at one of three levels. You can be a legionary, an optio, or indeed a centurion. You can get a copy of the magazine digitally or in print. Now, the length of the Macedonian Sarissa is fascinating because we have several sources which tell us a different length, and that leads to an immense amount of confusion. Of course, we are dealing with something that was made of wood, Cornell wood, and that seems to be the wood of choice, and none of that survives, obviously, in the archaeological record. So we basically have blades and sarissas, the butt spike of the Sarissa. And one find has a metal tube, which is a controversial thing by itself because it's a single find. It's normally said to be a sleeve to join two halves, but there's no other evidence. No literary source talks about two halves. No other archaeological find has sort of corroborated that. So that's a controversial thing. So the length is, of course, what we've asked about. So the Sarissa is, of course, the long pike-like spear that Philip introduces for the Macedonian army, probably when he comes to power in 359 BC. There have been some arguments made that it's not immediately introduced and that it's a later development, but that seems not to be the case. There are Sarissa armed cavalry later, Sarissa Foiroi, just to say that three times. Now, but I'll get to length because I haven't brought up length. Length is problematic because we have several different sources that tell us that it's 10 cubits, 12 cubits, 14 cubits, all the way to 16 cubits in length. That's the Sarissa. Now, the problem with that is that A, the cubit is not a standardized length anyway. The cubit is the length of your forearm. Elbow to wrist, that's a cubit. And so various different Greek states and Near Eastern states have a cubit ranging from 44 centimeters to 53 centimeters. That's a problem in itself. So 10 cubits at 44 centimeters and 10 cubits at 53 centimeters is a vastly different thing. I'm metric, so of course at 45 centimeters, for instance, it's 4.5 meters in length for the Sarissa, which is 14.7 feet. 14 and 3/4 or 14'9" I think. Apologies if my rounding into imperial system aren't quite correct. So at 12 cubits, that's 5.4 meters, 17.7 feet. 14 cubits at 45 centimeters is 6.3 meters or 20.67 feet, 20.8 inches. At 16 cubits, it's 7.3 meters or 23.9 feet, which, is getting unwieldy. But that's the low end of the cubit length. If you go at the other end of the cubit length, you're looking at a 10 cubit Sarissa is 5.3 meters long or 17.38 feet, all the way through to a 16 cubit Sarissa at 53 centimeters is 8.48, almost 8.5 meters in length, 27.8 feet. Now, of course, all of those could be combinations, which is one of the issues of the sources, that they could in fact be giving us the one who says 16 cubits may in fact be using a shorter cubit length, or the source that author was using might be using a shorter cubit length. So, for instance, when you're looking at those variations in number, a 10 cubit Sarissa using 53 centimeters is almost the same length as a 12 cubit Sarissa using 45 centimeters in length. So they are they are similar there. Similarly, a 14-cubit Sarissa using 53 centimeters is almost the same as a 16-cubit Sarissa using 45 centimeters. So it's possible that the reason for the confusion in the sources and the varying numbers in our sources is actually because whoever that source was using was in fact using a cubit of a different length, and therefore that's what's come through in the source material. There are some arguments which say that the earliest measurement, the source that's closest in date to Alexander the Great, which for those of you playing along at home is Theophrastus's Historia Plantarum, the history of plants, which says that it's 12 cubits long. So his measurement, 12 cubits, is 5.4 meters, or 17.7 feet. That's why you'll see 20 feet mentioned. It's a sort of an approximation, comes close to being what several of the sources tell us. Now, it's also peculiar because this, what could be an incredibly long spear, doesn't get any comment in the sources that we have for Alexander. No one says, gosh, aren't those long spears? And that's complicated by the fact that Iphicrates in the 390s BC has undergone several reforms in the Athenian infantry, which we're particularly uninformed about. One is that the aspis, the hoplite shield that we know from so many depictions of classical hoplites, becomes lightened and he starts using the pelta, or the pelte shield, which is a smaller shield. And then again, when the Macedonians come on the scene, they also said to be using a pelta. Now, peltas, of course, are famous for the peltast, which uses the light shield, half crescent in the classical form, but it just means a smaller shield. So when the Macedonians are using it, it's a shield, which again doesn't help us because the width is 8 palms. Again, not a particularly useful measurement, because just like the cubit, palms differ as to exactly how long it is. But 8 palms is approximately 60 centimeters in diameter, whereas the aspis is generally 90 centimeters in diameter. Again, one of the other things to bear in mind, this is not an industrial, well, you could have a shorter or a longer sarissa depending on who made it, just as you could have a wider or narrower shield depending on who made it. So, and again, it comes back to the cubit because on the inside of the shield, of course, is your forearm. So if you've got a longer forearm or a shorter forearm, surely your shield would be made to measure rather than some kind of pre-industrialized standard, which is just not the case. So what was I talking about? I was talking about that. And the length of the shield, the width of the shield is decreased and made lighter. And at the same time, we get several bits of information telling us about the length of the spear being doubled. Now, the traditional dory, the traditional hoplite spear, is normally about 6 cubits. Again, is that a 45 centimeter cubit or a 53 centimeter cubit? Roughly 2.5 meters in length. If you double that, which is what we're told in Cornelius Nepos, tells us that this is what Iphicrates does, that gets to 12 cubits. If that's therefore a spear that's been doubled under Iphicrates in the 390s BC, it's nothing special by the 350s and the 340s when the Macedonians are bringing it. And that's perhaps why it doesn't get mentioned as being, wow, that's a long spear, because they've been that length or lengthening for quite some time. We get another version of that in some of the sources, which doesn't tell us that it's doubled. It tells us that it's increased by half. So rather than 6 to 12, it goes from 6 to 9. Now, 9 cubits is just below the 10 cubits that we're told for the length of the sarissa. So, but again, if it's made 9 cubits long and the Macedonians come along and increase its length by 1 or 2 cubits, it's not a drastic increase in the way that if you have a 6 cubit and you're suddenly doubling it to 12, it would be. So if the spear, the dory spear, has been getting longer, then when the Macedonian Sarissa comes along, it's not such a radical leap of length, shall we say. And so that's what we get, these different talk about different spear lengths. The archaeological evidence isn't particularly helpful in this case. The earliest Sarissa points we have surviving are from Kyrenia, the Macedonian tumulus there. And the earliest time they're mentioned in a historical source is the Battle of Kyrenia as well. So without anything more to go on, we're basically going to end up with roughly 20 feet, which is as close as we can get without a 10-minute chat about the length of the Sarissa. So I hope that's answered your question, Bill, and we'll see you next time. Thanks very much.